Okay, so this is the Media Core MVP discussion that we are recording on July 27th, 2016. And basically the idea is to move the needle forward in Drupal core for media in some way, and we want to define what that way is. And we can either choose to pick a first step or first few steps or map out the whole area the way that the workflow team did, that's like years ahead of what we want to do. I don't think we necessarily want to get there, but the idea is to have a high level goal of where do we gonna go, and once we agree on that, in terms of what feature we want, what kind of media features we want in core, then we should go down and discuss how we gonna make that happen and when and that kind of stuff. Is that a good goal for a discussion?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I have a bunch of thoughts right out of the gate, but I don't want to just flare up and start yapping in case anybody else has ideas. Unless you're thinking.
We also have a Google Doc from earlier, which may or may not be good for starting points. There's a lot of prior history, so I'm not sure if it's a good one.
And then also just wanted to point out that 8.2's beta is in a week. So I don't think there's very much that can land for media between now and then, but I guess I did want to just raise the question if there's anyone on this team that has sort of suggestions for what still makes sense to focus on for that versus focusing maybe the call more towards 8.3 and beyond.
I don't think we can do much for 8.2, so whatever isn't. So I think Sam has the quick edit image feature in progress, which would be nice to land in 8.2. But other than that, I don't think we have anything in progress so much to land, I believe. If anybody has ideas, then please correct me there. So I think we would focus on 8.3, which is which we now have dates for that, so we can actually see what the dates are. So 8.3 is scheduled to be released April 5, 2017. And the beta is scheduled for January 30th. So the end of January would be the beta. So basically we would have time to build features until the end of January. Which
basically
is
6 months.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess the question then is, do we want to talk about the quick edit thing as the one thing for 8.2, or do we want to get into 8.3 discussion first on this call?
I think that this call shouldn't be specifically about versions. When we want to target stuff, I think that I think that the smartest way to go would be to discuss features that should be included in MVP, leaving technical details completely aside, because it seems that every time we dive into too much details and we forget about big picture. And then when we have definition of functionality that is considered core MVP, then I would start discussing technical details about how to implement it and stuff like that. Because I feel that sometimes we're trying to adapt our desired feature set to what we think would be the easiest to get in, which I don't think it's the best idea.
Okay. Any objections to just delving into what Yannis suggested?
Nope.
Okay.
And
Do you wanna?
I have a thought. Sorry, go
Oh,
ahead.
No, go ahead, Adam.
Well, I was saying I've had some thoughts on what I think we should pursue ultimately in kind of a large sense, and I could throw that out there if now is the right time to do that.
Sure, go ahead.
Well, okay. Basically, what I'd really like to see, and I told Sam and Giannis this at Nice Camp, is I basically kind of want, like, ultimately I'd like to see the basic use case that Lightning provides. Yes, I'm biased, but I think what I'd like to see as soon as possible is the media entity module, just that one module, renamed to multimedia and put in core, more or less as is. And it's basically just an API module, but I think I feel that it's the foundation of what the media ecosystem should be, and I think it should be the main module for how Core handles media. So that's my intense desire for the MVP in the next version, the next minor version of Core.
But which functionality do you solve with that? Just with adding this module to Core?
I think the functionality we solve, it's not so much that we solve functionality as we kind of define the API that we're going to use for multimedia handling in Core going forward. I think it's a gesture where it's just like, okay, so we've settled on this is how we're going to deal with media. Like, they're going to be entities, they're going to be a new entity type, they're going to use fields in this way, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not like it would provide, user-facing functionality out of the box, really, or nothing beyond what the basic entity system provides, but it's, I would like to see it because it would be a very definite declaration in Core about, like, this is how we want to approach media. So to answer your question, it doesn't actually provide functionality.
So to maybe get a little bit closer. Okay, so pull me back, Yana, if you need to, because I don't want to dive into technical details, especially a long discussion on technical details. But at the same time, I want to piece out the functionality question. So from a functionality perspective, if we put the media entity module into Core, so that becomes the answer to the question of how someone. So presumably maybe there's some way that someone can then create like U2 embeds via that, right? So they create a new media entity, and there's some field on the media entity type that allows for a YouTube URL that can then be rendered as a YouTube video.
Precisely.
What about local files? So local files are in Drupal already represented as file entities, and I believe would continue to be represented as file entities. Would they also automatically have a media entity representation of them, or not necessarily? Would there be some local files on the system that do not have a corresponding media entity?
Well, I can tell you the way Lightning is approaching this question. Sorry, go ahead, Giannis.
This is exactly the discussion that I wanted to avoid.
Okay, I guess what I'm
I think that like this discussion, like I can answer your question from like media entity represents local files using file entities, so that is still there. But this discussion, I think, should happen after we defined what our MVP is from functionality standpoint.
Okay, so
and if I can, because like last time when we were discussing this, we were mentioning different things. We were mentioning embedding remote media without them being represented as an entity. That's something that could potentially be MVP. Then we were mentioning reusability of media, no matter how it's represented, just like from the feature perspective. And it didn't seem that we even agreed on that. What is MVP for Core? And I think like maybe it sounds that all those details are too important to be missed out at this point. But I think if we step a step back and put all the technical stuff aside and at least agree that is MVP, then we will at least decide something, and then we can continue from there. Because I don't know. Otherwise, this call can end up being more or less the same as last two calls.
Okay.
And if I can continue that, sorry, Alex.
Oh, go ahead.
When I'm talking to people and asking them what is something that they want in core in terms of media, like what is MVP for them, almost everybody says it's reusability of media, and not necessarily, or most of the times, not handling remote media, but just reusability of images. Like, this is MVP for people that I talk to. I also agree, and most of the people that I talk to agree, that something that is closer to what Lightning provides, it's very nice to have, but it's beyond the scope of the MVP, in my opinion.
I agree. I think Lightning goes a little beyond.
But it's like definitely, because we're talking about MVP. We're not talking about the feature complete solution for media and core. We're talking about MVP, and MVP can be just a subset of functionality that we plan to get in at some point. So yeah, that's my opinion. Like, reusability of media, mostly images, is something that most of people want. And that means reusing this media in field context and reusing this media in embedding context, because core provides both of those.
Well,
and I'm not making any assumptions how that should be implemented, how this media should be represented. I want to avoid this discussion for now, because I think that if we go step by step, I won't repeat myself.
Okay. So I mean, I agree that matches my experience as well. That, you know, the ability to reuse images, like locally uploaded images, is in some way is definitely a very commonly requested feature. In my experience, maybe, I don't know if it's the next most commonly requested feature, but it seems to come up a lot, is the ability to just like for example, the article content type allows you to have an image as a field, and then obviously you can also put an image inside of the body field. To be able to do the exact same thing with video, and in particular, and most people have their, at least for small sites, when they think of video, they think of like YouTube, because that's the easiest place to have video and to want to reference video from. So I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but in my sense is that the ability to have a way to get a YouTube video in a field and inside the body field is, like, you know, also a very sort of commonly expected thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Can I say something about the idea of reuse? Like, to me, when I'm hearing reusing images, and that, you're right, I think that is definitely an MVP thing. You know, because the file entities are entities. They are reusable. They're technically reusable, but the reason I think people don't see them as reusable is because there's just no interface for selecting files. There's no interface to reuse files. So to me, reusing files, or reusing images specifically, is an interface thing, and to me that sort of says entity browser. That's like a big neon sign that says entity browser, and sort of moving in that direction. So maybe one of the things we really need to consider is a UI for selecting existing entities, particularly file entities. And so maybe we should move to, and I don't want to get to the technical stuff, but like, entity browser, this is the problem exactly that entity browser was built to solve. So to me, the reuse thing is really, it's a UI thing, primarily.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and for people on the call that don't know what entity browser is, not to get technically into whether or not that should get into core, but it basically provides a way to generically create configurable user interfaces for selecting or creating and selecting entities. So You can upload them, you can select them from a view, you can create new widgets that do more complicated things. So it's kind of a way to abstract the features that we're talking about for this MVP. So I definitely agree that being able to select existing images in some sort of visual way where you show users thumbnails or smaller versions of them just makes sense, and I think that's doable in 6 months. I think after, probably in another conversation, we should talk about what level of abstraction we can get into Core, or what level of architecture we can get into Core in 6 months, because that's not a lot of time, especially given the immaturity of some of the Contrib projects. So that's something for later on, but I do think that's doable in 6 months, either with a lot of work for porting Contrib, or with some work making kind of a one-off extension of the image widget that lets you do specifically this task.
Okay, so I think I'm hearing agreement that having some kind of a UI to be able to reuse local images, something like Entity Browser, right? Either Entity Browser itself or some scaled-down version of it targeted for images. It sounds like that's maybe like the top feature we want. And it sounds like there's agreement on this call on that. Am I right on that?
I definitely agree with that.
Okay. And then what do you guys think of what I was saying earlier about, like, would a number 2, or maybe, I guess we don't have to prioritize these yet, but would another, like, must-have feature be the ability to somehow get YouTube video into the site through a field or through inside a body field?
Yeah,
I don't know
think,
if it's a must-have.
Like,
yeah, it's definitely super.
Yeah, basically, I think when we're talking about image browsing, that's kind of, it's a MVP, but it's almost like something that people expect from Core anyway. So that to me is more like catching up a Core feature that people expect to be there from a CMS. And the idea of embedding a YouTube video is a new feature, but what's nice is taking out the architecture discussion of how that is actually stored and represented. It seems really easy if you're just using OEmbed. So I also feel like that's doable in 6 months, but again, with the simplified architecture, not with the huge media entity ecosystem architecture. So it's just different, because when you think of the time frame, I can see both of those features getting in. It's just that if we do that now in 6 months, how much work is it going to be when or if we decide to change the architecture and have to migrate everyone in 8.4 or something, thinking like further ahead. But I think both of those are doable in that time frame.
I'm definitely in favor of I'm definitely in favor of having video support, and I agree with you, Sam, that like it should be done in the easiest way possible, and if that's OEmbed, then so be it. I think the only reason I haven't mentioned OEmbed is because I personally haven't used it, but if that's the easiest way to do it, then I think we should definitely look into that. And I don't know if I would necessarily say that video is MVP, but I would say it's super important, and if we can do it, I think we definitely should.
Last time we discussed this, Wim was on the phone, and he pointed out TK-Editor has built-in buttons and stuff to embed OEmbed stuff. So we kind of get some WYSIWYG integration for free, is what it sounded like if we go that way.
Yeah, the only missing thing that Alex mentioned was the field support, but really that would just be more like a formatter that works exactly the same way, and takes the link and formats a real OEmbed piece of HTML. So even the field is really easy. It's just that long-term issue, but we don't have to think about or discuss that right now. So I think that would be a great issue to open. It seems like a small feature, actually, in the short term.
Yeah. It's actually something I've done some thinking about already, and there's actually a contrib module. I think it's something like CK Editor, Media OEmbed, or something like that, or Media Embed. I can get the link if people are interested in. But I've been looking at that contrib module and have been wanting to sort of get a core issue posted for, because I don't think we even need that entire module, but I think that module has a lot of great code in it that sort of already integrates with CK Editor and some of the other stuff. And I've been sort of looking to how to sort of strip down the stuff that's in there to be sort of a starting point for a core issue. So I'll try to get that posted in the next week or two, and then we can talk about that. Yeah.
I definitely agree that maybe YouTube videos are not on the same priority level than images, but definitely following very closely. There is one thing that I was thinking about after last call that we had, and I will get a little bit technical there and break my own rule, and I will punish myself later because of that. I think that everything that is media in Drupal should be some kind of an entity. Because if we go with something that is not an entity, we lose one of the main parts of Drupal where Drupal strives, and main reasons why Drupal is so powerful. We lose all the integrations that we might get for free from Contrib, because everything that works with entities won't work with that if we are not using entities, and will generally be integrated and work if we do. That makes sense. So I think that the representation of media should be an entity always.
So I if we were doing this as like a must, should, could kind of analysis, I would definitely agree with that statement being, a should. In terms of whether it's a must, I guess just to play, because personally I'd actually like to see us get there as well, but I guess in terms of it being a must, I want to play devil's advocate and ask, currently links are not that, right? Like you can in your body field, you can make a link to something, highlight a word, use the link button in CK Editor, and paste in a URL and link your text to some external URL. And those embedded links, in a sense, or the links that are inside of your text area, right? They do not have, they're not stored anywhere as an entity, and and so I guess my question to you, Yanez, is, or to the group, is why do we feel that, say, YouTube videos or other remote media sort of needs to be an entity? Like what makes them sufficiently different from links that suddenly having them represented as entities is is more important?
I get your argument, but there's probably much less that you can do with links compared to what you can do or might want to do with YouTube videos. Like with videos, you probably want to control at some point how they're being rendered. There is less options there with links. Can you still hear me?
Yeah. Yep.
Because everything went quiet. So you probably want to be able to define how they're displayed. You very likely might need to handle some kind of metadata related to YouTube videos, which you generally don't need with links, and stuff like that.
I would also add.
Sorry, Adam. My main concern is, now we'll get a little bit technical again. That I would like this to be something that Contrib can build on. to extend functionality that core provides. And the easiest way to achieve that is through entity system. Because if we do something that is one-off thing, and it's much harder to extend, then Contrib will do completely separate solutions anyway, and we achieve nothing.
I would add reusability as a concern there, as I just did in chat, where it's like, I can sort of, it's very easy to imagine a user going through their library of images or their library of videos in many different scenarios. For me personally, it's a little bit harder to imagine them going through a library of links. So, I don't know, like, and it's, in addition to all the things Giannis just said, that's kind of why I also am on the side of having media represented as entities primarily. Just because they stand alone like that, as opposed to a link where it's like you don't just kind of go to a link page and display a link by itself. Like a link always appears in context with other stuff, as opposed to a video which might or it might not. So that to me is kind of an important distinction.
Yeah, I'll throw something in too. I was asking the same question to Giannis at NiceCamp because I have a hard time coming up with use cases for this too, like specific customer use cases. But that's one thing about the entity system that's cool, is that people will come up with use cases that we can't think of. So like if we design this thinking, oh, no one will want to reuse YouTube videos because why? You're just embedding them as a one-off thing, or you can make a content type called enriched video, and that can have the URL field, and they can do all other fields. If we design it with the specific use case in mind and kind of restricted, we won't be able to see all the ways people can use this. So we were kind of brainstorming a little bit, trying to come up with use cases. And there's stuff like, being able to display YouTube videos in a view, and your YouTube video, entity is fieldable, and so you can attach arbitrary metadata to it and search through it. And if the core of your business was based on external media, you would definitely want it as an entity. And the difference is almost, I would say, the majority of users just want that URL embed, O-embed feature. But Drupal was never designed with the specific use case in mind, I guess. It was always designed with this abstract entity system. So that would be my vote for doing it this way, I guess.
Based on the discussion that you mentioned that we had in NiceCamp, I actually started to doubt if having remote media as a full-featured member of your entity content ecosystem on your site is actually a very frequent requirement, because I never asked anybody. And I talked with Sasha yesterday because he had much more interaction with clients, especially media clients, because of the MP8 in past years. And he confirmed that they are constantly asking for that. Because MP8 doesn't support that either. Just supports local files, essentially.
So and specifically, you're saying MP8 was wanting, just having the ability to have remote video without it being an entity wasn't satisfactory for them.
Yes, because this functionality is in the MP8 already,
okay.
And they use it. It's using URL embed, but and that was exactly the question that I wanted to answer, because we have this distribution that supports just this plain embedding and doesn't support remote media as an entity, and I wanted to know if that is satisfactory for our clients or not. And Sasha confirmed that they're constantly asking for this next step. They don't necessarily say that they want it to be an entity, because they don't know about the architecture behind Drupal necessarily that much, but they are asking for functionality that implicitly defines that you want those remote videos or anything else to be an entity.
Okay, so if we go with the idea of that we want remote video, because being able to have YouTube videos on a site is pretty like expected functionality, and we want to make it an entity, right? Then we do get into the question of what's the entity type, and like Adam suggested, a media entity type. Do we need to? I guess. Again, I'm trying to avoid necessarily going into like an hour-long debate on that, but just to push a little bit on it. If we do that, if we say that local images are file entities and YouTube videos are media entities, are there any, and I think I'll put in the corollary that would mean that YouTube videos are not file entities and local, at least some local images are not necessarily media entities, maybe. Are there any features that stand out in people's minds as things we should talk about as to whether those features challenge that architecture? For example, is there a feature that we need that is able to pull local images and YouTube videos into the same view, right? That would be an example of a feature that would be challenging to do if those two things are different entity types.
Well, that's exactly, that's sort of a problem Lightning also addressed, where it's like by using media entity and having the one media entity type, all this becomes unified, and the images and videos are just bundles of media entities. So that's like, if you take one media entity type, that's very unopinionated, it makes very, very few assumptions compared to files anyway. That becomes a non-issue.
Adam, something happened with your sound.
Sorry, let me, it's better?
Now it's okay again. Yeah, now it's better.
Oh, okay, sorry. I think what I was just saying is that, like, if we build it on an entity system using like media entity, where everything is, where images, videos, tweets, etc., are just bundles of an entity type, and this is exactly what Lightning did, then, as you're saying, Alex, like, we actually gain a lot of flexibility that way, because Lightning, in fact, does provide a view that's like, here's every media item in your system, and you can filter by type. So by unifying them under a single entity type that's very unassuming and unopinionated and just makes very few assumptions, a lot of problems, I think, in the future go away. And also, I have to dip out for a few minutes, so sorry. I'll be back in about 10.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing from Adam then is that it is nice if local images have a representation as a media entity as well. And does that get us into, are there other, how much do we want to delve into that thinking, or are there other topics we'd rather cover?
Well, do we have a functional definition of MVP? Does anyone else that disagrees with what we said until now? Because it seems that at this point we have reusability, local images, YouTube videos. Is there something that is missing from a like bare minimum MVP? Would somebody argue that that any of those features is not an MVP?
I mean, would like Alex saying, would the browsing of remote and local remote media entities and local files together, is that an MVP or is that not?
I personally would assume not, given that adding a new entity type in 6 months and getting people to agree on that definition, and also teaching users the differences between file entities and media entities, if we went down that route. I don't know if that I have concerns about whether that's a Drupal 8 problem, and then especially if we can do that in 6 months for the next minor version. So,
But
Okay.
if we put 6 months aside,
yeah,
and if we put entity discussion aside,
yep,
what would be your answer then?
yeah. Then I mean, I think that's. I mean, we have to address that entity issue that we just brought up. So I think that should be a long-term goal. I mean, no matter what solution we come up with. So yeah, I'm going to try not to say any like proper nouns of modules. It is kind of hard when you've been doing this for a while, but
Don't tell me.
yeah. What I'd like to not see is two ways to do the same thing, and I think that's the issue that we keep coming back to, is that, you know, when we start either creating new things in core or bringing in things from contrib, we have to consider the user base that already exists, and ideas like, you know, if we introduce some new abstraction, you know, I don't think that can just be an experimental module. We kind of have to make an architectural discussion on, like, this is how core does this. It's the one way to do media. You have to do it this way. This is our migration plan. Like, I would prefer to see something that's a really big effort that hurts a lot, but it changes the core architecture, than something that, oh, we're just going to throw X contrib module into core as experimental and hope that people adopt it, and then maybe in another minor version we'll start migrations or something like that. So anyway, so that would be my concern, is that, you know, as long as we don't introduce features that can confuse users and duplicate functionality, I support whatever plan we come up with.
That's a very good comment. Sasha had similar comment yesterday also. Like, his point of view was that, and Sasha being Birdie, in case that's not clear, that for this deep down, really heavy architectural stuff, using experimental modules is probably not the best idea, because you're dealing with data, and like data consistency and experimental, it's like you can get into serious problems. But I'm getting technical again.
I think where you can use experimental modules is like browsing that data and explaining that data.
Yeah, like user interfaces, where you just swap existing user interface with something else, but the underlying data architecture stays the same. Like a field formatter or a field widget is probably a great example of that. Like something that is not invasive. Okay.
So I'm still not really clear where we ended up on whether local images and remote video, whether there needs to be the possibility of creating a single view that mixes, that has, you know, rows returned for each one within the same view.
Yeah, so I mean, so in my opinion, I think that would be difficult to implement in the time frame we want for this MVP. I think if we can hold off on that for another minor release and have an architecture discussion, like specifically about you know, new entity types or media entity, that sort of thing, I think that would need to happen first before I could say anything for sure. Just the basic functionality of OEmbed is very simple. I mean, mark my words saying that about a core issue, but it's very simple to get into core, I think. So it just depends. I mean, if we're really strict about this timeline, I don't have hope that new architecture can be planned and implemented in 6 months, if we can hold off on the YouTube embedding thing until that point, then maybe, but we need to decide on the architecture. So it depends what we want to do, I guess. We can either wait for the architecture, or we can implement something right now that has the basic functionality of non-reusable embeddable links, or whatever the technical thing is. So
I think, like, to answer your question, Alex, if Core decides to provide support for YouTube videos, then I would expect them to show up in a media library. Again, putting all other discussions aside, just thinking about functionality for end user.
So what I'm hearing then is that reusability of the media we already can upload in Core, which is images, both remote and local images, that's something that gets brought up in every single discussion as a missing functionality that is expected from people. And so the first focus of the MVP would be basically filling in holes or filling in gaps that other people expect Core to already do. And that does not necessitate solving the architecture issue, because one part of that is just like a view, basically, like an MAV browser-esque thing. And the other part of that is OEmbed for linking stuff. Is that what I heard?
No, I mean,
Okay.
what we're sort of decoupling. If we just look at the feature of reuse a UI to reuse images, just local images, right? That doesn't get us into the remote question at all. So that's something that we feel like we can do. And then so that's one thing, is just having the ability to have better UIs around our local files. And then we have a separate track, which is that we would like remote media. And then the discussion is that the question is, well, once Core allows for remote media, does that have to be paired with that media existing as an entity? And does that have to be paired with existing as an entity in such a way that a single view can show you both local files and remote? And if we oh, sorry, Christian?
Yeah, hi, this is Daniel talking to Christian. The use case we have for local media and remote media being as one entity would be a simple gallery, for example, where you mix up your local images with some video from YouTube or maybe even a Twitter card, I don't know. And those are generated very easily with either with views or with multi fields. So in both cases, it's easier if they are from the same entity type. So that's where we would wrap them into some entity if there was a core support for it, even if there wasn't one. So that's our use case, for example.
That's great. So you're basically saying I get like a user-facing gallery, not just a library on the admin side.
Yes, exactly. User-facing library. Gallery, yes. Slideshow or something like that.
Yep.
I can type it in the notes, but I'm still trying to understand what we decided on, because I'm not sure I got it. So maybe someone else who it's not 7:51 a.m. should take it in minutes.
We actually didn't decide anything yet.
Okay.
But it seems if we try to go just into the problem of reusability of local files or local images, this is definitely part of the MVP, and technically seems to be much easier to do. And as soon as we add remote media into the question, we end up with serious architectural discussions and refactoring probably, and possibly also data migrations and stuff like that. Which means that timelines for the second option is probably quite longer than the first option.
Okay, so
But,
predominantly focus on local media first because we already have it in core. Remote media starts to introduce all kinds of questions around how we want to store that stuff in a neutral way so that it can be displayed alongside a local media, blah, 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 blah. So boot all of that till 8.4 and focus on different stuff for 8.3. Like lower
and we could actually have entire other discussion or core issue just to talk about that architecture, because I feel like that specifically does need to happen before any remote media features need to get written, especially given the feedback here. And not everyone agrees for sure in terms of like contrib community and core community on what that should look like. So I think we can probably argue that remote media needs to be represented as entities pretty well, because I've heard a lot of use cases here already, but that's not the same thing as like porting media entities or something like that. So yeah, so that would be an interesting like separate discussion to have for like the long-term issue, not the MVP for this minor release.
I have another question. If we decide, let's say for 8.3, that we want to do this step 1, like reusability of local images, Contrib already solves that problem today. You have a module, you enable it, and you get that. It's very unlikely that we would be able to just move that module into the core because of the dependencies, which means that we would have to re-implement the entire feature, more or less, in a more custom way. What is the benefit of doing that?
Well, is that true, or is that just an assumption that's being made? I guess I don't know what the dependency chain looks like.
I think I could answer both maybe. In the general, like without talking about what contrib module, it's that if we implement the local image browsing, we have to decide, are we going to do that in a way that's abstract enough to apply to other kinds of entities? Like, can someone create a selectable view of nodes that they pick from, and they like click on a node and use that as like a really simple example? So are we going to make the MVP be like, oh, this module does one thing, it'll always do one thing, and this is what people want, and that's why we wrote it this way? Or are we going to do it in a way that's abstract? And if the latter is true, we have to decide what timeline we're talking about, because now that 6-month timeline seems less approachable because that's a big feature in a lot of ways. So
in my mind, the way this would happen if, say, we were Google and we were rolling out a new feature is, first we would support local image browsing. So our browser would be catered to images. And then we would say, now you can browse videos too. So now there would be like a little selector on the same interface that we used to use, but now there's a drop-down or something like that. And now it works for what, you know what I mean? So in my mind, it would be a starting point that we'd enhance. Like the nice thing about experimental modules is you can change them, like as much as you need or want to before you kind of move them in core properly. So the critical thing is to get them in as a starting point during feature thaw. So like we're working on this thing outside in right now, and the goal is to get that committed, hopefully, by Monday, because that's the cutoff date for features in 8.2. Once it's committed, though, we can make changes all the way up to and including RC1, and then we can continue making changes even in patch releases of 8.8. So because the module itself is flagged as alpha or beta or something like that. So try not to get too hung up on oh my God, this 6 month time frame, because really the development time frame of experimental modules is all the time. Like you can be continuing to evolve experimental modules in 8.3.1 and 8.3.2, but the critical thing you have to do is land the thing during, like, before January 30th. So the thing you land has to be of use to users. It has to, you know, not introduce technical debt in the form of like data integrity issues, like this kind of thing. But it doesn't have to be perfect. So that I just want to inform people, like that's a big change in Drupal 8 compared to Drupal 7. You do not have to get this right in one go, right? Now, the questions of storage and architecture, that does get tricky because then you are possibly talking about data integrity issues if, like, you know, we told everyone in 8.3 they should use this thing, and then in 8.4 we're like, whoops, yeah, we're not doing that at all. You know, we'd have to write an upgrade path or something, but you know, like in terms of the browser itself, feel free to put it in as a basic thing and expand on it later. We don't have to get it all abstract and right in one crack. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and it would be cool to get, you know, in the issue, make that really clear and say, look, this is the MVP target for 8.3, but in 8.4 we want to make sure that this same sort of feature could be used on other kind of entities, or, you know, we want to keep improving on it. So I think as long as we're open about that and actually do it, then it's good. So
yeah, and there's a template. I'm trying to find it. I can't find it off the top of my head. Anyway, I'll find the outside in issue or the workflow in issue. The div issue is another one, but there's a template that basically lays out this is what we need to do for commit, right? And so there will be your own suggestions as well as like core committers might also make suggestions, like there has to be a security review or whatever. And then you can also put a list of must-have, should-have, could-have issues after initial commit, and those will block the must-have ones will block it from becoming an official core module with no caveats. You know, and then the should have, could have are just like, yeah, if people get around to them, that would be great, you know, kind of thing. And agreeing on that list is a prerequisite to getting the module committed in the first place. So you have to do some front way thinking in that later. But yeah, I'm trying to find an example.
And this is really, can I, just to make one quick suggestion, one thing that we had talked about in some of the planning before was maybe having sort of like 3 branches or pillars to what we're doing, where we had sort of an initial out-of-the-box media solution that was, you know, simpler, and then the second sort of, you know, pillar, or I don't want to call it branch, but the second sort of suite of functionality was like a media extras sort of solution. And I think, you know, we could possibly you know, think of the functionality along those lines, where what we deliver in this first MVP is just that immediate out-of-the-box solution, and then what we do in 8.4 or at a later date is this sort of extras scenario that could be the more advanced use case that we're thinking of. And if we sort of divide things up that way and really make that clear to users, we could potentially have you know, a slightly different architecture there, where the, you know, the immediate out-of-the-box solution is just a lot simpler architecturally, essentially kind of like what they do in WordPress, right? Where what WordPress does architecturally with, you know, what you get out of the box is very, very simple, and then, you know, the sort of unified media entity with this more advanced view could be something that we do that is part of sort of an extra media extras implementation that's got more advanced functionality to it. And I know doing a migration path or sort of a different architecture between the two may not be ideal, but it may be appropriate given the, you know, the different use case, where the first case could just be something that's dead simple, which we largely have, and then, you know, this sort of full-blown unified media entity could be part of like a, you know, a different scenario. You know, that's a different suite of modules or architecture, but anyways, just a suggestion or something to think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I would love for our initial stab to just be like feature parity with experience parity with WordPress, but it seems like every time we try and go down that route, a bunch of people start talking about database storage, and I just get lost.
yeah, and we don't need that for the browsing of local images, which is good. So we will get a lot of parity just from this one MVP that we're talking about now. It's just that, yeah, long term we may end up, if we implement the architecture stuff, we get to this dream state where we're actually past a lot of other CMSs and how they handle this. It's just hard to have that conversation when we're behind, right? So I understand that.
Okay, well, I killed conversation. Sorry about that. Anyway, back to the MVP definition, and we're over time now, but is what is written in the top of the document at this point correct? Which I can recite for the Google Hangout purposes. 8.3 is focus on local media first. There are existing gaps in the user experience that can and should be filled. And that entails 1, reusability of local images and content, 2, an entity browser-like experience to display existing images. And this, as a note, much of this functionality is largely ready, so it's an easier starting point for MVP. And then in 8.4, it's get into remote stuff. This complicates things, and we need to decide on architecture first, which will take more time to decide on architectural storage. And that includes YouTube videos, entity browsers showing local and remote media alongside. Yeah, I would like to mention OEmbed, but I didn't know which bucket that went into. Like, to me, OEmbed sounds great and low risk because it's an existing. My understanding is that it's an existing standard that other people already use. It's got CK editor stuff built in, and it can just hinge off the link storage, which we already have. So to me, that does not fall under having to argue a bunch of architectural details, but I don't know if I'm missing some nuance.
Yeah, it does. It's what, so it's what Yanez was basically arguing we should not do. I mean, I think we can open a core issue to discuss it more with a wider group, but the concern that Yanez raised is, I think, not wanting to have a situation where an 8.3 core allows for YouTube links to be, exist on the site, in the core database, without them being full-fledged, first-class entities, because then that leads to problems. I'm not entirely clear on what those problems are, but I mean, obviously it's nice if they're first-class entities, and if they become first-class entities in 8.4, that's ideal. If we're saying they're not going to be first-class entities until 8.4, then the question for 8.3 is, do we allow them into core as just URLs, or not? Or do we say that for that you need contrib, because when we put it into core, we want them to be first-class entities from the starting point?
Yeah, I mean, if there was any way of resolving that and doing OEmbed prior to figuring out how to get entities all wrapped up in it, I mean, that would be a colossally huge win. We could do tweet embeds, we could do video embeds, we could do lots. I mean, that would be humongous.
Like that.
Yeah.
That was there was sort of two pillars or two approaches to media, where you had sort of a base sort of starter solution, and then you had sort of an extra solution that was more advanced functionality. That was where I was, like, the key differentiator that I was thinking would distinguish those two is that the starter, like, simple out of the box scenario would be the OEmbed, and then, like, the media extras or the more advanced solution would be the media entities. And, like, the OEmbed could be something that's, like, in the entity, and then the media entities could be part of the extra solution, which initially would live in contrib, and then we would migrate. We might migrate into core, as sort of a, eventual scenario. But it's kind of, we had talked about potentially having these kind of, glue-like modules that stitch together functionality. And the starter kit could be the OEmbed scenario, and the extras could be the media entity functionality. And essentially, when you enable, say when you enable or disable one or the other, you would have a migration path between the two where I think it might be tough to do that migration path. Like, it may not be feasible, but the scenario would be that you could take stuff that, was done in using OEmbed and migrate it to media entities, or vice versa. But I don't know that we could do that migration path, but that was sort of the thinking in the scenario. And I think there's a lot of users that, certainly for smaller sites, just want that simple starter kit solution, which just out of the box gives you the OEmbed, and then the more advanced scenarios that are really some of Drupal's sweet spot would be sort of this extra scenario that would use full class, that would use full-blown entities.
Plus, correct me if I'm wrong, but let's say I can hear Jana's cringe as this whole thing is going on, but just hear me out. So if we went that way, we added a little embed button in CK Editor, and it gave a special link field that let you embed a tweet or whatever. Presumably, that would also be something we would add to the link field property. So in other words, if I did care about structured media or structured entities and I wanted to be able to pull up a view of all my YouTube videos, I would do it the same way as I handle an image right now, which is if I care about an image as a first-class data attribute, I add it as a field. So if I cared about video as a first-class data attribute and I wanted it to show up, I could add a link field with an OEmbed formatter, I'm hand-waving here, to an existing piece of content, and I could get that same thing. It's just the site builder has to choose that rather than Core being really smart and doing it for them, correct?
Images are first-class citizens in both cases.
Right, and I'm suggesting OEmbed would also be a first-class citizen. I mean, it's not a first-class citizen in both cases. If I guess, yeah, because you do some dark magic that I didn't even realize you did. Or if you use the image button in CK Editor, somehow it tracks.
No, if you use image button in CK Editor, it creates a file entity.
Yeah.
And embeds it in an abstract way.
Right.
And that's the reason why you can list this entity with a view of files, for example.
Yeah, I guess I just don't know anyone who's used that, but I also haven't talked to a lot of people, and I assume you guys have. So if that's a common thing, it might be worth holding up the entire train of awesomeness. It just feels like,
You can start using that as soon as you introduce your usability of media, and MP8, for example, does that, because MP8 is allowing you to reuse local files. And images that you might have embedded through the Core image button will show up in the library that's created. You probably didn't see a use case yet because Core doesn't allow that.
So Janas, what's your objection to, if what we're saying is it's going to be at least 8.4 before we can have remote media as entities. I mean, I'm not saying whether I agree or disagree with that statement. Just saying that seems to be. Let's as a hypothetical. Let's assume that it's going to take more than 6 months to resolve all of the issues around how to make remote media a first-class entity. So if we're already accepting that feature won't be in until 8.4. What do you see as a problem of in 8.3 allowing, OEmbeds as non-first-class entities, and then migrating them to first-class entities in 8.4, if that migration path were possible?
Two things. One is that we use a lot of resources on that we could have used on other stuff instead. And the other is that we have this functionality in Contrib, and I don't think there is any additional value being added if we add it into Core for 6 months.
I totally disagree with that. There is tremendous value in adding it to Core because that way, when you stand up Drupal next to WordPress, Drupal doesn't look like an embarrassment. Because if we say 8.4, that means it would be over a year from now that users would be able to have this functionality out of the box.
But if it has been like that for 10 or I don't know how many years,
and we keep losing.
6 months don't too much difference. And we have distributions that have that, and we could market those distributions. We have Lightning.
I don't know. I just feel like.
I might be wrong.
Like, if I could throw 3 engineers at this for 6 months, like, could we do both in 8.3? Because I just feel like reusability of media is great, but that's, it's only solving part of the problem that people have. And it doesn't get us parity with WordPress.
If you can throw 3 engineers into that for 6 months, then we don't have a problem.
Then we don't what?
We don't have a problem, because like I'm wearing this like media initiative in Contrib hat, where we are struggling with lack of resources all the time.
Right.
If we can solve that problem, and if we can afford to develop competing solutions in parallel, that's fine with me. But I guess that we never did that in the past. We never.
Well, I guess why we're having this discussion is part of solving that problem, right? Like, I can't commit 3 full-time resources until I see a plan that I can, get my boss behind. That's effectively like this state that everybody is in who wants to help with this, is they don't know what your plans are. They need to see something in your roadmap, but they're like, fuck yeah, we need that thing. Here, Jane, go code your brains out on that for a little while. And right now, the roadmaps that are communicated either are entirely contrib focused, but doesn't grab my boss because he wants to fix things and core properly, or they are all about this architecture stuff that like 4 people on the entire planet understand what that is. So I think like we need to somehow articulate a plan, and we can get rid of the version numbers. We can do it instead like this has to happen before this thing. And this is low-hanging fruit that's independent of anything, and we could get that in first. But like, we've got to somehow articulate a vision here that has end-user like interest, and then you'll see resources come. But resources aren't just going to show up when there's no plan, And especially if the plan is we don't get really key user-facing functionality for a year and a half.
There has been a plan for 2 years, and we've been communicating that plan all the time.
Yeah, so
I disagree with that statement.
But we need to somehow articulate it in a way that like I can show my boss and like the folks at media company X who use Drupal can show it to their boss. Like we just need to like write it down in a way that it can be sold to people who have control over the engineering resources that you want. And right now I haven't seen that, and maybe I just missed it, and that's great. If I missed it and it's already there, we can just copy and paste it in the issue summary and done. But like I feel like we're still kind of discussing these fundamentals.
The main fundamental difference that we have is that you always think just in perspective of core, while I don't. I guess this is the main difference. And our plan was always to have things in core when they are ready. And we are very close to the point when we can do that.
Yeah.
But I don't agree with the statement that there was no plan. There is plan, and Dave and I have been communicating that plan for 2 years now. On every DrupalCon there was a session, on a lot of camps.
I'm sorry. No.
Blog posts.
We have a plan. We just don't have a plan for what that looks like in core. That's what I meant. I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to be insulting there. I meant we don't have like that's what this issue thing in the Google Doc is intended to be, is what's the plan for getting what you've got into core. And it's fine if that plan also includes, and we need to get this and this and this done in contrib first, that's fine. But like we don't have that plan. Or if we do, I have not seen that yet. And I thought that's why we had this call, is to discuss that.
Yeah, so, I was feeling that we're getting closer to that plan.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I would just say too, the thing about the contrib plan is like if you want that, and that's what we're going to go with, the contrib plan is to get stable releases out for all of these ecosystem modules, then file core issues. So the problem with that, which we've already discussed, is that could be 6 months from now, that could be a year from now. We don't we don't know exactly when stability will happen, just that we're working really hard to get it. So that's the different thing. If we want to do this like 100% from the media project up, it's going to take a lot longer than getting these quick MVPs in core. So there's kind of two efforts happening at the same time.
So, I mean, just one comment that I would make as well is that as we think about this and like how we want to do this, it sounds like where we're stumbling on is the architecture discussion, right? So how does this work under the hood? In terms of what I'm hearing like from Yanez or Samuel, but I think what Angie's focusing on, and partly sort of what I'm thinking of as well, is what is the end user editorial experience like? And I think a lot of those users, whether they're going to be using the OEmbed or whether they're going to be using, eventually media entities, what's happening under the hood, they don't really, I don't want to say they don't care about it, but they don't really understand it, right? So when they're thinking about, what they can do with Drupal out of the box, they just want to see sort of, that you can embed in a video and essentially have parity with WordPress is like one example, so that that's not embarrassing. And then, if they can eventually have it be fieldable, I don't think a lot of those users aren't really going to care or understand whether that's done with OEmbed or whether that is eventually done with the, with a media entity using, sort of an additional suite of modules. So, I'm wondering, is there like, what do we see as the impediment between shifting between, if someone is using OEmbed to do a simple scenario, and then they were migrating, so let's say that they needed to shift over to media entities and they were migrating to that, like how difficult of a migration path is that? My thinking is that it's probably not too difficult in the sense that if a user is using that simpler OEmbed functionality, they're probably not generating like a massive amount of content, a massive amount of media, right? It's probably a simpler scenario. And if they had to migrate, it's realistically just going to be a one-way migration from sort of a starter kit OEmbed scenario over to media entities, and they might have to, recreate re-enter their media and then modify some existing content, which like I did with Time when we did their first media implementation. And I don't think that's too difficult a migration path to go from, sort of a basic media implementation to a more advanced media implementation. Like I'm wondering if we could think about this from the user scenario, like what's the challenge in switching from an OEmbed or upgrading from an OEmbed implementation to a media entity implementation that's more advanced?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I think from my perspective, it's that migration bit where, I think the overall concern is that if we do it this way, and we we decide on like the entities, I'm trying to think about it. So I actually support getting it in early, but I have the concern that the abstraction and the architecture bit will either not come in Drupal 8 or not come for like a very long time. And so I don't want like the early MVP to slow down the architecture work, I guess.
But I'm not thinking, I'm saying forget about the timing issue, right? I'm not thinking about this from an MVP perspective or from a timing perspective. I just think from a functionality perspective, there's a lot of basic users that they'll be very happy to have something that gives them parity with WordPress, right? There's people that would potentially use Drupal right now that can't because we don't have media parity. We don't have simple functionality and simple video functionality, and there's a huge segment of the market that uses that. And my thinking is, forgetting the timing issues and forgetting like MVP just from a long-term perspective, having that as the starting point in Drupal core, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. And I think if we had a relatively simple migration path, which like I've been through doing Drupal migrations that let someone go from an OEmbed or direct embed local storage type scenario over to a more advanced, media entity scenario, like that's a good option to give them. If we can say to them, okay, we don't say to them our architecture in Drupal has changed. We say to them, we have this more advanced media implementation that you can use if your use case scenario requires it. here's the migration path, right? And in most cases, it's going to be pretty simple, right? In most cases, like even in a worst case scenario, like when I did it with Time, they had, I think it was like 3,000 embedded, media entities that were a combination of MP3s and videos, and it took me like a day and a half to do the migration. That was all done manually. Like we didn't have a migration path or anything. I just did a simple regex and migrated it over to file entities in Drupal for Drupal 7. But we could give someone a migration path like that to go from OEmbed to a media entity scenario that would just allow them to evolve and give them this extra functionality that they can't get in WordPress, right? So it's sort of a nice differentiator for us. But I don't think that like the vast majority of like simple users that right now are being boxed out using Drupal because they can't, they're not really going to appreciate what we're working on in Contrib right now, but that will hopefully we can eventually get into core that's going to give this sort of fairly rich media editing functionality that gives you sort of fieldable, extendable, unified media entities. Like there's the basic user doesn't need that. I think the people that need that are digital publishers, and they're going to be happy when they get it. And there's probably not going to be a lot of them doing this migration anyways. They're fine using Contrib for now. Like I just think if we forget our developer or sort of architecture hat right now, and if we just put on the end user hat, like who are we building this for, and why do they need it, and what's the migration path? I don't think it's as big an issue.
Yeah, the only thing I'd say to plus 10,000 to that, by the way, but the only other thing I'd add is like we keep saying it's in Contrib, but it's like really though it is in Contrib. But imagine you're a first-time Drupal user. Yeah. You go and you're like, shit, I can't upload a video, and you go to okay, well let me search for a video module, and you end up at project/video, which is last updated like 4.7 or something. Oh wow, that has an 8.x version. That's cool. But you know what I mean? It's like you're not going to end up in the media suite of modules without a lot of hand-holding. And then when you do, it's like 30 different things to install. You know what I mean? It's like it's really hard.
And which one of those 30 and which one is most current and stuff like that.
Yeah,
like the whole learning curve that I think is a separate use case. It's a different user.
Yeah. So there's huge value in having this pre-configured out of the box to an 80% perspective, like huge value, like unmistakably huge.
And that, like I dropped in that slide from, that slide that I just dropped in the Google Doc, like we can delete that, but that was from a 2014 presentation that we did a couple times where like what I was thinking of in terms of this media kit is just really dead simple like media functionality that gives us out of the box parity with WordPress that for more advanced sites is basically a throwaway, right? Like a media publisher isn't going to use that unless it's a media publisher that's fine with using WordPress anyways, right? But that's a battle right now that we're losing, right? We're not even in the game because we don't have any functionality anyways. And I think that I would think of it separately from our traditional, more advanced media entity architecture mindset. Like these are users that we've kind of been ignoring right now that I think it's potentially an easy win, right? Where if we have a simple, OEmbed implementation that doesn't leverage like all the rich media functionality that we've been working on, it's still a good win for a lot of people. I mean, frankly, it makes me cringe. I would never want to do that on a site, and I would always want to use media entity and have my media be fieldable and have it be part of a unified entity. But there's a whole lot of people that are that obviously have a totally different thinking to me or our mindset because they're all using WordPress for that sort of stuff right now, and they're really happy with it. And I've done small projects like a couple years ago where like I talked to them about this rich media functionality in Drupal. They just didn't care. They're like, hey, I get what I need out of the box with WordPress, and I can just do a simple embed. That's great. I can add my 50 videos to the site and move on. And they don't even have to think about it. Literally, they can install WordPress, like I did on just like before the last call. I installed WordPress in 15 minutes, dumped in some videos with OEmbeds, and that there's a lot of users that are just really happy with that. And I don't think that I think the challenge it would be really challenging to migrate, be able to do sort of a bidirectional migration and have all that be fully automated. But I think the migration path there is pretty simple, and it's generally just a one-way migration where you're going from the O embed scenario to something that's more advanced. But I don't think, like, it's not like we need to have a one-click migration where someone can just swap back and forth between the two. And I realize, like, sometimes it's challenging to say, like, architecturally the file and database storage on this is going to be different, and it's not going to break your content, but you're going to have to think about it differently. But I think I don't think that's a huge problem.
No, and I mean, I agree with that. I think the only part I would say is that you said it isn't a timing issue, but it is a timing issue because, I mean, you and users want it in as soon as possible. So that is part of the timing thing, is that, you want this functionality as soon as possible and not to be held up by the architecture, which is totally fair. I'm not saying it's bad. But I mean, that is an issue of timing. It isn't,
But I think the users that want the media entity functionality anyways are different from those users that Angie just articulated that, like, can't navigate contrib and stuff. Like, most users that are going to want a more advanced media implementation with a unified media entity that's fieldable are fine. Are more likely to be fine sort of navigating core or navigating contrib and following a simple instructions document to install the contrib modules until we're ready to have something in core.
Sure. I mean, I agree with that because I know how simple the OEmbed integration is. So I get that, like, talking about the architecture is frustrating because it's such a quick win. So if we bring that up in core and it gets in early, it's fine. It's about the follow-ups, I guess, that are concerning. But we've already talked about that a lot. But I think
and also, like, forking efforts, right? So, like, if we have one set of people working on O-embedded core and then another set working on O-embedded contrib in a slightly different way, and then, like that kind of thing can get unfortunate.
Yeah, and
go ahead, Sam. Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say it's one of those things too where this isn't going to, if we get these two MVPs in, the use cases that the current contrib modules have are not, core has not reached feature parity with that, and so we're gonna have to keep working on contrib. So it's not like our efforts can now be switched to core after these get in. I think that's worth noting, is that once we get this simple image browsing and once we get this simple OEmbed, that doesn't cover, what we're trying to accomplish in contrib and what we've already accomplished. So it's kind of, it's a splitting of efforts in that way, but of course the core development community is much larger, and, we don't have to be the people responsible for these features in core, so I'm okay with that. But
and
that is
just
bringing up, I think.
Like, the last comment I'd make is that I think, like, what actually would make me cringe the most or concern me the most would be compromising what we're doing in contrib and not eventually getting that media entity functionality right, because there's years of work that have gone into that, and I think, unfortunately, there's still a whole lot more work to go into that. Like, it's a lot more than 6 or 12 months work to eventually really get that media entity functionality right, and that, if we can really nail that, is a huge differentiator for Drupal, right? It's probably going to be the best media implementation in any CMS, and certainly in any open source CMS. And I think that whatever we can do to sort of buy the time and get the resources to really do that really, really well, and eventually when the time is right, get that into core, is like that to my mind is the top priority, not for this call, but is the top priority for, like, the broader efforts we've been working on. And then the other comment I would make is architecturally, in terms of aiming to have this unified architecture where that's the architecture for everything, I don't think is necessarily going to be the case anyways, because the really advanced media implementations that are going to be working with, like, the platform and Riala and, a ton of other media solutions that are going to involve lots of sort of APIs and integrations are probably going to be a slightly different architecture anyways, right? So I think we're going to end up having this sort of third pillar or branch that is different from the media entities, where there's going to have to be some kind of, bridge between the two, but again, it's a different, that's going to be probably a slightly different architecture as well, right? Where there's a whole other bundle of issues that get raised there. So I don't think, I wouldn't necessarily I wouldn't want to compromise any of those sort of longer term plans for purposes of this MVP. And if we take this sort of three-prong approach, it might be the simplest. Like, it's a fairly simple approach to explain, right? You can explain it to someone in like 2 minutes that, like, out of the box we get this, simpler OEmbed WordPress parity. The second option is like rich advanced media functionality, and the third is this sort of API extendability. Like, if we can explain it easily and then meet the timelines and not compromise that long term, that would be my. I mean, I'd be curious to get Yanez's thoughts on this, but from my perspective, I think that's what would be most important.
Well, it seems that we kind of have a plan, right?
Sorry, Yanez, what did you say?
Like, I guess it's like it seems that we are like going into the direction where we can do OEmbed and handling local images, local files in a way that makes them reusable for like more short term, and then in parallel we have discussions planning how to do this more complex stuff. I guess that this is kind of the agreement that we have here.
Well, this is what the
two
two people advocating most on the user side of things are saying. I don't know that we have agreement on that, but yeah, like the folks on the more, like, we have to talk to users every day and that kind of thing. Like, I won't speak on Lily's behalf, but I'll say I, as a product manager, definitely favor getting useful functionality in front of users sooner rather than later, because we are getting our asses handed to us by inferior CMSs because we don't have that. And it's silly because we do have that. It's just it requires Sherlock level intelligence to find it. And if it was pre-configured out of the box, we would eliminate a huge stumbling block to adoption.
Yeah, and like I think if you
I also agree with Willie. I don't want to compromise the long-term thing that you guys have going on by saying, okay, you got to make this architecture decision in the next month so that we can get this in it. You know what I mean? That doesn't make any sense to me, especially if this is still in flight and contrib.
But like if we were to deliver that the way you talked about, Angie, I think we would pretty much immediately stop getting our ass handed to us, right? Because we can out of the box stand up WordPress and Drupal next to each other, and we can kick WordPress's ass because we give them media parity out of the box plus a bunch of other stuff, right? So it makes the path of adopting Drupal much easier. And then I don't think we would be distracting any, like Yanez, I think we could do that without distracting any resources from what the media team is working on, and maybe even be able to garner some more resources or support for what we're doing to like really do it right with media entity. And then once we have media entity really well baked in contrib, that could be migrated to core, perhaps by another team or with additional resources, right? Like we could, if we do the sort of site and community work that Gabor is talking about, we could really generate some momentum to get that work that's being done in contrib migrated into core without distracting, like you or Prismas or Samuel or Dave or me if I can contribute. But we could really focus on sort of doing it right with media entity and then get that in. But this is, I was being sort of vocal on the call, just advocating the user scenario, even though that's not technically what I agree with from a development perspective. But I don't want to, I don't think, I would just echo what Angie said, where I don't think we necessarily have agreement on this. I was just proposing it, but I'm really curious to get your and Samuel's thoughts in terms of do you guys agree with this, or does this work, or can that give us a plan for the next 6, 12, 18 months to eventually media entity stuff done right and sort of fulfill this path we've been working on?
So I gave my opinion on this, but if you think that getting these things in fast will help us reaching the long-term goal, that the long-term goal won't be forgotten after we get these smaller pieces in, then I totally agree with that.
I don't think anyone would deny the long-term goal. The trick would be it would have to be done in a BC way, so we couldn't break anyone's existing sites.
Yes.
But no, I think you guys are the subsystem maintainers of this stuff, so if you say in 8.4 or 8.5 or something that we have a patch that swaps out the kind of shitty kludge storage for the penultimate awesome storage, and it's backwards compatible and there's a migration path, I think there, you know, I don't see why anyone would have a problem with that. I can't guarantee as many people would get excited about working on that as they would get excited about working on the user-facing things. But maybe if more people were working on the user-facing things, that would free you guys up to just focus on the architectural bits that you care about.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is really those two concerns. I think that's the challenge for us, is to make sure that we follow those two concerns, which is, yeah, like make sure that we make it clear through the issues that we work on that whatever interim solution we come up with has, you know, we're still committed to the long-term architecture, including, you know, so we're thinking in terms of migration paths and upgrade paths as needed. And those, I think, those just become concerns that we have to sort of, you know, make sure that we document on the issues. That we, you know, this needs the plan. If we get one storage in sooner, we need to sort of document what the plan, you know, what the thinking is behind how it's going to be upgraded to what we want later. And then the second, I think that's doable. And I think the second concern is making sure that the people who want to be working on, you know, the long-term architecture, so people like Yanez, that they, you know, can do that without feeling too distracted by having to sort of, you know, spend time on the interim solutions. And correct me if I'm wrong, Yanez, but I'll just phrase it that way, right? Like ideally we could do this in a way that doesn't suck Yanez's time, like reviewing the short-term stuff, at least minimizes that.
I mean, I can commit time to helping with that bridge between the short-term and the longer-term solution. And like part of my thinking on that is that the path from that simpler kind of like out-of-the-box media kit to the eventual sort of media extra scenario that we're going to want is the same path as anyone coming from like WordPress to Drupal or from another CMS to Drupal is going to have to follow anyways. Because most other CMSs are just going to have this embed, they're not going to have this rich media functionality, so they're going to have to go through that same sort of migration anyway. So it's ground that we've probably got to cover, right? Like if we're going to give someone a path to migrate from WordPress to Drupal, it's going to be the same scenario as migrating from this sort of simple out-of-the-box media implementation to something that's more advanced. And like either I can take that on or we can recruit someone else to do it, because it's pretty easy to do. Like it's pretty easy to sort of write that up and explain how to do it. And I think we could even write a simple module to do it, right? Like a simple module that at least would give you a mapping of here's all your existing content that currently has an O-embed in it that you need to migrate over to a media entity if you're upgrading to the media extra solution that gives you the advanced functionality. Right? And my thinking in terms of that user, like if we just want to put on the user hat in terms of who we're talking to that's going to be doing that, would be like, you know, a small to medium-sized business or maybe a basic enterprise that's building out a corporate site that they might only have like 50 or 100 videos in their max that are just going to be a bunch of corporate stuff. It's a pretty easy, like, you know, afternoon to day and a half migration to move over from, you know, sort of the starter kit to the extras media implementation.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that plan. I think that makes sense, and I think most people can understand that, which is good. You know, I brought up this thing Yanez had with the image browsing issue, which is just from, you know, the start of development on the issue, as long as we have a plan and even like other issues created for 8.4, I think that would be great to make sure like all of this is, you know, that bridge sort of thing happens very, very early, like even before the development starts on the short-term solutions. So, yeah.
One question, one comment and one question is like, I think if we had a team that could work on, like, Angie, do you guys have anyone, like, would we have to, is there any way we could do this sort of MVP implementation without consuming like Yanez or Prismos's time, or like other team members that are working on media entity?
Yeah, I mean, potentially. I need to get Dries' sign off. You know, I have the three engineers. It would be Tim Plunkett, Kevin O'Leary,
Ted Bowman half-time, and Gabor half-time-ish, more like quarter-time. But anyway, we have a crew of people who are tasked to work on usability improvements for Drupal core. So yes, in theory, we could totally take this on. It's just, I guess where I would worry about that is, one, we definitely don't want to do that if the media maintainers are not on board. And two, I'd really like to know what involvement as stakeholders they would want. Like, is it we come to this meeting once every couple of weeks and show, mock-ups of what we're doing and they say yes or no, or is it like, you know what I mean? Like, figuring out the engagement model there would be really good, because what we don't want to do is, like, this is an initiative that has traditionally been starved of resources, and if all of a sudden they got a bunch of resources, that's also a problem. You know what I mean? Because it's like, because they're going to have questions and need answers to them, and we don't want to inundate people with a bunch of stuff, especially Kevin is kind of like hyper, he does, anyway. So I just want to make sure that, we can certainly help. I mean, it'll help me a lot if I can tell Dries that if we put people on this, we can have the top 2 biggest problems that people identified in the survey knocked out by January. I mean, I don't know if that's possible, but you know what I mean? Like, that would be the goal, if we take people off outside in once that's in and we move them to this, perhaps. Again, I don't want to commit to anything because I haven't talked to Dries about this, but yeah, that's certainly doable. I think, though, if that happens, I would want to make sure that whatever we're doing as an interim solution is aligned with the vision that you guys have, and we don't put core into a corner. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and then the other comment I was going to make was just like, Samuel, I could take on writing up. You talked about sort of needing to document and write up that path, like right now, sort of at the 8.3 scenario. Like, I could do that pretty quickly right now and prepare a draft for, like, you and Samuel, or you and Yanis and Dave and others to review, that would ideally connect those dots the way that Angie just talked about.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think hearing from, it would be good if we can get Dave on one of these. I know he hasn't been around as much, but I just wonder if he has opinions he would like to share too, but I guess if he's not here, we have to wait.
Angie, to answer your question about the engagement, like, from my perspective, in that case, most important thing would be to see, like, if there are different ways of implementing this in core, and one way makes more sense for further extension of this functionality in Contrib, and one way, like, stops that, then I would like this solution to follow the first way.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like to be engaged to make sure that we do that.
So maybe like in a core parlance, it'd be like you'd want framework manager level review of this, like to make sure that we don't knock ourselves into or box ourselves in any corners.
Yeah, I don't know how you want to call it. Like, the good example of where core did it right is embedding of images in WYSIWYG, because it was a pattern and an approach that we easily extended in Contrib.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an example where this was done right.
Yeah, and that came about because Wim and Dave Reed, and I don't know how much you were involved in that, Yanis. I know Wim and Dave, were working pretty closely together to make sure that was being done that way.
Yeah, Wim was involved. Like, it all started with Summer of Code project, but Wim, I believe, was involved from the beginning for, like, that top level questions and helping us to do it right. Yeah, but it's a very, very good, good case example, definitely.
So that this is being recorded, so I guess careful of your answer, but do you have an example in mind that you think would be good to look at as one that did not go well, just so that we kind of can just to have a sort of that comparison point, so that we kind of know the landmine to watch out for?
I don't or wouldn't necessarily want to bring up anything, but I can think about it, and if we create an issue, I can provide some.
Okay. So I really need to go, and we all really need to go because this call is way over. But I guess in terms of next steps, you've got some more notes in this document here. It sounds like we are coalescing around this idea of pushing user-facing changes as an interim solution first for 8.3/8.4 in a way that frees up the folks currently kind of being pulled in two directions to buckle down and focus on the direction that they're currently being pulled in, which is getting contrib in a good space to eventually land that stuff in core as well. So I guess the next step is we need someone to take this big slug of text and paste it into the issue queue in a way that people who were not on this call will be able to understand what the hell we talked about. So would anyone like to sign up for that job?
I can if no one else wants to. But I also, wanted to I don't want to take that away from either Yanez or Dave or someone who's been much more involved in the media initiative. So
I would like to do that, but I doubt that I will be able to do it before second week of August. So that's why I don't want to commit to that.
I can't commit to doing it today, but I can do it this week. If no one feels like they'd rather be the one to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I can help work through what's in the Google Doc, prepare sort of a revised version of that just to get things started, and then maybe you could try and sort of take that and tweak it as needed to put it in sort of issue parlance to post it to the issue. Would that help?
Yeah, certainly.
And I have like 5 hours in meetings today, so I can do it while I'm in some meetings today. I'm in back-to-back meetings now till the end of the day. So.
Yay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Willie.
Yeah, and I guess Alex, one way or the other, Alex, why don't you take this over tomorrow, regardless of what state it's in, and then we can still get it out this week. Because I imagine once it hits the queue, there's going to be all kinds of feedback and discussions and stuff. But knowing that at least the people on this call are aligned on here, that's a really good start. And thanks for listening to the arguments. I appreciate it. Okay, I need to run, and I think most people do too. Thank you so much for hosting this. This was really valuable to kind of get this knocked out. I feel like it took a couple of calls, but I think we got to a place where potentially everyone gets what they want. We'll find out, I guess. But anyway, I really appreciate you guys taking the time and setting up the opportunity for us to talk as a group. So thank you.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks all.
Gabor, thank you for organizing this. It's a huge help.
Thanks, Gabor.
Thank you for doing all that stuff that you're doing.
Yay!
Yeah. Cool.
And now have a nice vacation, Gabor. Okay?
Cool. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Bye, everybody.
Okay. Bye. Thank you.